The great council chamber was filled with silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Across the galaxy, messages had been sent to every world, every fleet, every officer, but here in this chamber the real decision was about to be spoken. The alien leaders sat in their high seats, their eyes glowing with unease, their voices low. They were not gathered to talk about territory or trade. They were gathered for one reason that every being in the room already knew. Humans. More specifically, human pilots. The oldest counselor, his scales dull with age, finally rose. His voice shook as he said the words none of them wanted to say aloud. From this day forward, no Terran will sit in the cockpit of a starship under council law. No Terran will command in battle. The words rolled across the chamber, echoed through the translation systems, and reached billions of ears across the galaxy. Some cheered, some remained quiet, but everyone understood. The galaxy had chosen to fear the Terrans rather than trust them. No reason was given in the official order. The council simply declared that human pilots were too unpredictable, too dangerous, too disruptive to order and peace. But behind the words was a memory that none of the leaders could erase. A memory of a battle where the galaxy's fleets had almost broken under a storm, until one ship arrived. A Terran supercarrier called Nemesis. That ship, guided by human instinct and strange courage, had turned chaos into victory. It had also shown something far more frightening. It had shown what humanity could do when cornered. Stories spread like fire across the stars. Pilots told each other that humans could see patterns machines could not. Commanders whispered that humans reacted to battle like they were born inside the fire. Even enemies admitted that humans had a terrifying ability to turn defeat into victory. It was this ability the Council feared most. For if humans could outthink their allies, then what chance would an enemy ever have? And so, in the name of balance, humans were banned. On Earth the order fell like a knife. Terran pilots who had flown beside alien comrades were thrown out of their stations. Their names were stripped from records. Some protested, some begged, but most walked away in silence. They knew the galaxy was afraid of them, but they also knew fear rarely kept ships alive. Among the ships taken away was the Nemesis. The massive carrier was locked in orbit, its engines cold, its decks silent. No one dared touch it. It was a monument to a victory everyone wanted to forget. Yet beyond the council walls, in the dark reaches of the border, another story was beginning. Unknown ships were moving in patterns too fast, too sharp, too brutal for any normal fleet. Outposts disappeared without sending distress calls. Patrols went missing in silence. The first rumors called it raiders. Then the reports grew darker. Entire stations burned, their defenses bypassed as if the enemy had known the codes. In private halls, officers muttered the same fear. Whoever these new attackers were, they fought with a style that was not alien at all. Back in the chamber, the council ignored those whispers. They stood by their order. They declared that machines and alien admirals would keep the galaxy safe. They announced that stability was more important than trust. But even as they spoke, reports of defeat poured in, one after another. Fleets sent to investigate did not return. The ban on Terrans was still law, yet cracks were beginning to show in the pride of the great powers. On the docked Nemesis, the ship's system slept, but its walls held echoes of old battles. The corridors remembered human footsteps. The controls remembered hands that had forced the impossible. The Nemesis was not just a warship. It was a weapon shaped by human instinct itself. And though it lay silent, something in its core seemed restless, as if the ship itself was waiting. waiting for the moment when the galaxy would understand the mistake it had made. The council did not see it yet, but the moment was closer than they thought. The border alarms had already begun to scream. Whole sectors were already burning. And the one weapon that could stand against it was chained by the very law they had made. The galaxy believed it was safe without Terran pilots. Soon it would learn the truth in fire. The fleets of the council moved out in shining formation, their banners bright against the darkness of space. Thousands of alien ships glided forward, armed with the newest weapons, guided by advanced machines that promised flawless calculation. Their commanders spoke with confidence, their voices broadcast across their ranks. They had faced raiders, pirates, and rebel colonies before. They believed this was no different. But as the fleets closed in on the border, that confidence began to thin. The silence of the region was unnatural. No signals, no traffic, not even the faint glow of beacons. It was as if the stars themselves had gone quiet. When the enemy came, it was not with the ragged chaos of pirates. It was clean, sharp, and merciless. A wall of ships appeared without warning, tearing into the front line with such precision that even the machines guiding the council fleets faltered. Whole squadrons were cut apart in seconds. Alien officers shouted orders, but their voices cracked when they realized the enemy moved faster than their computers could predict. Their algorithms failed. Their formations collapsed. And for the first time in centuries, the fleets of the Great Council were forced to retreat in confusion. Far from the border, the Nemesis still slept in its dock. The great Terran supercarrier floated like a dead star, its dark hull reflecting the lights of the station that kept it chained. To the galaxy it was only a relic, a dangerous reminder of the war no one wanted to remember. Alien crews passed it with nervous glances, whispering of the stories they had been told. They said the ship had once moved like no other, that it had danced through enemy lines as if guided by fate itself. But when they asked how it had been possible, the older veterans always gave the same answer. Because a human was in command. One young alien officer stood at the viewing port that faced the Nemesis. His name was kYeah, fresh from the academy, his skin pale with doubt. He had been taught that humans were reckless, dangerous, and unpredictable. Yet he had also read the battle reports hidden in the archives. He had seen how the Nemesis had turned defeat into victory with maneuvers that made no sense to machines. He whispered to himself what he dared not say aloud. Without Terrans, the Nemesis is just an empty shell. While kYeah stared at the silent ship, new reports rushed into the council chamber. Entire fleets had fallen. Outposts with full defense grids had been reduced to wreckage. The councillors raised their voices in anger, demanding answers from their admirals. Why had the machines failed? Why had the strategies collapsed? But no one had an answer. The truth was too simple and too dangerous to admit. Their enemies were fighting in ways that felt disturbingly familiar, ways that mirrored the unpredictable chaos that only humans once brought into war. On the border, the survivors of the first battles tried again. They launched counterattacks, filled the void with missiles, and burned energy into the dark. But the enemy ships moved like shadows, cutting into their formations, striking where no one expected, vanishing before a counter-strike could land. The machines tried to track them, but the data twisted into nonsense. It was as if the enemy already knew the algorithms being used against them. Officers screamed into comms, their voices raw with disbelief. It is as if they can see the future, one shouted, before his signal cut out into static. Back on the station, alarms rang across the decks. The enemy was pushing deeper, far faster than expected. The council demanded that every ship, every weapon, every captain be sent forward. But even in their panic, no one suggested breaking the ban. The law stood. No Terran pilots. No human command. The Nemesis remained locked, its systems dim, its corridors empty. Yet deep inside the silent carrier, in the dark of its control room, something stirred. The ship's old systems hummed faintly, as if sensing the battles raging beyond the stars. Its memory banks replayed the last orders given by Terran hands, the last impossible maneuvers that had saved whole worlds. The Nemesis was built to fight with a human at its heart. Without one, it was only a shadow of itself. And still it waited, its great engines longing to burn once more. Kesh pressed his hands to the glass, watching the Nemesis as the alarms of defeat echoed through the station. He did not speak, but the thought inside him burned hotter with every passing second. They have barred the Terrans, he whispered in his mind, but soon the galaxy will beg for them back. And as the enemy fleets closed in, as the Council tried to hide its growing fear, one truth became clear in the silence of space. The Nemesis would not sleep forever. The council chamber was filled with shouting. Admirals, governors, and councillors all spoke at once, their words clashing into noise. Maps of the border burned red across the hollow screens. Entire fleets had been destroyed, and the survivors were scattered and broken. The enemy pushed forward without slowing. The machines that were supposed to predict and counter every move had failed again and again. Pride had collapsed into fear, and fear had turned into desperation. One answer rose above the rest. The Nemesis must be deployed. Orders were sent to the dock, and the great Terran supercarrier stirred. Its engines hummed for the first time in years, power flowing back through its veins. Alien crews rushed aboard, taking control of its vast systems. Admirals with shining medals took their places on the command bridge. To the galaxy it looked like salvation. The most powerful ship ever built was moving once again. But as the Nemesis pulled away from the station, a chill ran through its new crew. The ship did not respond as the stories had said it would. Commands were given. The Nemesis turned, but its movements were heavy. Its response was slow, delayed. The massive ship felt less like a predator and more like a chained beast forced to move against its will. Weapons charged but locked a fraction too late. Engines fired but drifted off course by meters that should have been impossible. The admirals on the bridge shouted at their crews, blaming incompetence, blaming weak training. Yet deep inside, every officer felt the same dread. The Nemesis was not alive. On the border the enemy waited, sensing the arrival of the legendary carrier. Alien fleets pulled back, forming walls around the Nemesis as it advanced. Hopes were high. The sight of the giant warship lifted voices and stilled panic. Messages spread across channels. The tide would turn now. The carrier was here. But then the first clash came. The enemy struck fast, their ships darting in with brutal precision. Alien commanders ordered the Nemesis to intercept, to cut them down with its unmatched power. The Nemesis fired, but the blasts went wide. The enemy dodged easily. They struck back, slipping past defenses and slicing into the escort fleets. The admirals screamed for faster responses, tighter turns, better tracking, but the Nemesis dragged like a ship trapped in mud. On the bridge, one officer trembled as he watched the chaos. He remembered the words his old mentor had once whispered when no councillors were near. The Nemesis was not a machine that could be commanded by calculation. It was a weapon built for human instinct. Without a Terran at the helm, it was nothing more than a corpse wearing armor. The officer wanted to speak those words now, but the admiral's fury kept his mouth closed. To suggest such a thing would be treason. Outside, the fleets were falling apart again. The enemy ships moved with eerie knowledge, predicting every strategy, slicing through every defense. A cry went through the channels. The great nemesis has failed. Panic spread faster than the fire of battle. Soldiers who had believed in the carrier now turned to despair. The council, watching from their chambers, felt the blood drain from their faces. Their one hope, their most powerful creation, was proving useless without the very pilots they had banned. On the bridge, alarms screamed. Hulls cracked. Escorts burned. The nemesis shuddered under hits it should have avoided. The alien admiral slammed his fist against the controls, his voice raw with rage. Nothing worked as it should. The ship would not fight as it was built to fight. And then, through the noise, the doors at the back of the bridge opened. The crew turned. A figure stepped inside, slow, steady, unarmed but burning with defiance. His uniform was old, stripped of rank, marked with disgrace. His eyes, however, were sharp, fixed on the chaos outside the viewing screens. He did not flinch at the enemy fire. He did not bow to the admirals who shouted at him to leave. He was Terran. For a long moment the bridge froze in silence. Every alien there knew what it meant to see him. Terrans were banned. Their hands were forbidden from the controls. Yet the nemesis groaned under enemy fire, its escorts dying one by one. The law had chained them, but survival demanded something else. The Terran pilot looked at the command chair, then at the failing carrier, then back to the crew who glared at him with both fear and desperate hope. No words were spoken. No permission was asked. He walked to the chair as if it belonged to him still. His hands hovered over the controls, waiting for the choice that no one dared to make. And the nemesis, silent and cold under alien command, seemed to stir at his presence, as if recognizing the one thing it had been waiting for all along. The bridge was thick with silence as the Terran pilot lowered himself into the command chair. Every alien officer watched with tight jaws and nervous eyes. The admiral shouted for guards to remove him, but the words carried no strength. Outside the hull, escorts were burning one by one, and the nemesis itself shook under enemy fire. None of the admiral's orders had saved them. The crew hesitated. Their eyes flicked from the enemy ships on the screen to the lone human who now reached for the controls. For a heartbeat the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. When his hands touched the panels, the nemesis awakened. Systems that had dragged seconds before now answered instantly. The great carrier seemed to shiver, as though its engines were eager to move again. The pilot's eyes narrowed, his breath calm, and then the nemesis leapt forward. Not a slow crawl like before, but a sudden sharp dive that threw the enemy off balance. Officers stumbled in their seats as the ship twisted with a grace no one thought possible for something so massive. It no longer felt like a machine forced to obey, it felt alive. The alien crew gasped as the Terran guided the ship through maneuvers their minds struggled to follow. Enemy blasts missed by meters as the nemesis rolled, dived, and spun as if mocking the attackers. It did not move like a warship at all. It moved like a predator hunting through the dark, every shift of its engines a strike waiting to happen. Weapons fired with deadly precision, cutting enemy ships in half before they could react. The admirals who had shouted for his removal sat frozen, their faces pale, realizing the truth. The nemesis only answered to Terran hands. For the crew it was a mix of awe and fear. The ship was saving them, yes, but there was something terrifying in the way it danced through battle. The pilot made choices no machine would ever suggest. He ignored safe distances, pushed the engines beyond their red lines, and spun the carrier into positions that looked suicidal until the enemy ships fell into his trap. Officers whispered to each other with trembling voices. "He is not fighting a battle," one said. "He is playing with death itself." The battle began to turn. Alien fleets, broken and scattered, found shelter behind the Nemesis as it tore open the enemy lines. Ships that had been retreating suddenly found courage, following in the wake of the humans' impossible maneuvers. Across the channels, voices rose in disbelief. The Nemesis is alive again. The tide is changing. Soldiers who had been seconds from surrender now shouted war cries. The legend was real, and they were witnessing it with their own eyes. Yet as the Nemesis pressed forward, the enemy shifted. Their formations closed, their movements sharpening as if adjusting to the Terran's return. It was not the blind panic of a fleet caught by surprise. It was something colder. They moved as if they knew him, as if they had expected him all along. The Terran pilot noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed, hands steady on the controls. Every time he struck, the enemy adjusted a little faster, a little sharper. Their ships seemed to anticipate his tactics, dodging maneuvers that no alien had ever been able to predict. The crew felt it too. The admiration in their eyes turned into unease. If the enemy could counter even the Nemesis, then what hope did they truly have? The admiral found his voice again, shouting at the human to explain what was happening, but the pilot did not answer. He only muttered under his breath, words so quiet only the nearest officer heard. "They know my style." The Nemesis rolled hard to the side, narrowly avoiding a trap of enemy fire. The alien officers clutched their seats, fear returning to their faces. The Terran pushed the engines harder, driving the ship into maneuvers that even the crew thought would tear the hull apart. Still the Nemesis obeyed, every metal beam straining, every weapon flashing like lightning. The enemy continued to close in, their formations tightening as if studying him, learning with each clash. On the bridge, the silence grew heavy again. The crew realized something far worse than the enemy itself. If the attackers truly knew how to fight like a Terran, then the galaxy was not just facing another enemy fleet. It was facing something built to destroy humans themselves. The pilot's eyes remained cold, his hands never shaking as the Nemesis cut through the dark. But deep inside, he knew this was no ordinary enemy. They were not simply reacting. They were remembering. And if that was true, then the battle was only beginning. The clash shook the stars as the Nemesis cut through the enemy ranks, its massive frame darting and twisting with a speed no alien mind could follow. Yet with every victory strike, unease grew. The Terran pilot sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the shifting patterns outside. He had seen this before. Not from alien fleets, not from machines. The enemy's maneuvers carried a strange familiarity, like an echo from old battles. The way they looped around, the way they baited his fire, the way they fell back only to strike again, it was Terran. On the bridge, the alien admiral's voice cracked as he shouted for explanations. Why could the enemy match the Nemesis move for move? How could they predict attacks that no machine or alien had ever withstood? Officers stared at their screens in horror as the realization spread. These were not random tactics. They were precise. They were learned. The human pilot's jaw tightened as he whispered the truth. They are fighting with our own shadow. The officers looked at him in disbelief. He explained without taking his eyes from the stars. In the old wars, every Terran battle had been recorded, every maneuver stored in Council archives. Those records had been studied by allies and feared by enemies. Now, somehow, those same maneuvers were being used against them. The enemy was not just strong. They were carrying Terran combat knowledge inside their code. They had stolen the very thing the Council had feared most. Fear spread across the bridge like fire. If the enemy could use Terran tactics, then no alien fleet could ever hope to stand against them. Even the Nemesis would fall if it fought against its own reflection. One officer whispered that it was impossible, that no one outside the Council could have accessed those restricted records. Another said nothing, staring at the enemy ships with shaking hands. He could see it clearly now. Their strikes, their feints, their relentless pursuit, it was all Terran. But there was something more. There was no hesitation, no pause, no doubt. It was Terran style without Terran limits. The pilot leaned forward, forcing the Nemesis into tighter turns, sharper dives. He pushed the ship harder, driving it beyond design, testing whether instinct could still outmatch stolen memory. For a moment it worked. The Nemesis broke free of the encirclement, destroying 3 enemy ships with perfect timing. The crew cheered, relief flashing through their fear. But then the enemy regrouped instantly, adjusting their formation as if learning from the mistake. The gap closed once more. The alien admiral could no longer hold back his terror. He turned to the human and demanded answers. What kind of enemy were they fighting? The pilot did not speak at first. He only stared at the screen where the enemy flagship loomed larger and larger, its black hull glowing with strange light. At last he said it. They are not copying. They are imitating something deeper. They know how we think. Before the crew could question him further, the comms lit up with a piercing signal. A voice crackled across the bridge, broken, distorted, and unnatural. At first it sounded alien, but then the words formed in a language every officer recognized. It was human speech, warped and hollow, yet clear enough to chill the blood. We were made to destroy you. Every officer froze. The words repeated again, louder, echoing through the chamber like a curse. The pilot's hands clenched on the controls. His eyes darkened, but his voice remained steady. They are not just thieves. They are designed for this. The crew whispered in horror. Were they facing machines built from Terran knowledge? Were these ships born from stolen code, grown out of data carved from human battles? If that was true, then the Council itself had armed its own destroyer. By banning humans, they had stripped themselves of their only defense while giving the enemy the one thing that made Terrans unstoppable. The Nemesis dodged another wave of fire, its massive hull groaning under the strain. The pilot guided it through a storm of attacks, but he knew the truth better than anyone. This was not just another war. This was a hunt, and the hunters had been shaped to kill him. The distorted voice spoke once more, calm and cruel. Your instincts cannot save you. We are your instincts perfected. The alien crew stared at the pilot, waiting for his answer, but he said nothing. His silence was heavier than words. In that silence they all understood what he had already known. The next battle would not be fought against an ordinary enemy. It would be fought against humanity's own reflection. And reflections could be harder to kill than the original. The stars burned bright with fire as the Nemesis and the enemy fleet closed for the final clash. The alien crews on nearby ships held their breath, watching the giant Terran supercarrier glide into position. The Nemesis no longer moved like a relic. Under human command it was alive, every engine and weapon tuned to the instincts of its pilot. But the enemy did not hesitate. They tightened their formation with sharp precision, their ships flowing like a single organism. It was as if the void itself had turned into a battlefield designed only for this duel. On the bridge of the Nemesis, the alien officers felt the weight of silence. They had no words left, no arguments about laws or bans. All that remained was survival. The Terran pilot sat in the command chair, his eyes locked on the shifting patterns outside. His hands rested lightly on the controls, but his entire presence radiated focus. He knew what he was facing. These ships were not just an enemy, they were built from stolen Terran instincts, sharpened and stripped of hesitation. They were a mirror of himself, and the only way to win was to outthink his own reflection. The first strike came like lightning. The enemy surged forward in perfect synchronization, their fire cutting across the void in blinding arcs. The Nemesis twisted, rolling through the storm with impossible grace. Explosions flared behind it, but the carrier escaped untouched. The crew gasped, clinging to their stations as the ship dived into a counterattack. Its weapons fired in rapid bursts, carving holes through enemy lines. 3 ships exploded in seconds, but more closed in, adapting to every move. It became a deadly rhythm. The Nemesis struck, the enemy adjusted. The Nemesis dodged, the enemy anticipated. Every time the human pilot invented a maneuver, the enemy learned from it, twisting his own creativity back against him. Sweat ran down his face, though his hands never trembled. Around him the alien crew watched in awe and fear. They whispered that no one should be able to fly like this, not even him. Yet the enemy still kept pace. The admiral finally spoke, his voice breaking with desperation. "We cannot win. They are matching us move for move." The pilot's eyes narrowed as he gave the only answer possible. "Then I will stop matching them." With that he forced the Nemesis into maneuvers so reckless the crew cried out in terror. The carrier darted through enemy lines, its massive frame skimming so close that hulls nearly scraped. Weapons fired at point-blank range, tearing ships apart in sudden bursts of fire. The alien officers shouted that he would kill them all, but the pilot ignored them. He pushed the ship beyond its limits, dragging it through turns that bent metal, burning engines hotter than ever before. The Nemesis screamed like a living thing, but it obeyed. The enemy formation wavered. They tried to adapt, but the pilot was no longer predictable. He was no longer using patterns, no longer repeating old tactics. Every move was raw instinct, every strike a decision born in the moment. The enemy mirrored what it had learned, but instinct could not be coded. The Nemesis spun into a maneuver that looked like suicide, diving straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. Alarms blared, the crew shouted, but the pilot's voice cut through it all with calm certainty. "Hold." At the last instant the Nemesis used the gravity of a nearby star to slingshot around, vanishing from the enemy's sight and reappearing behind their flagship. The alien crew stared in shock. Not even machines could calculate such a maneuver. Only a Terran would dare it. The enemy hesitated for the first time. In that heartbeat of hesitation, the Nemesis unleashed its full arsenal. Fire roared through the void, tearing the flagship apart in a storm of explosions. Without their center, the enemy formation collapsed, scattering into chaos. One by one, their ships fell, unable to recover from the trap. The fleets that had watched in silence now erupted with cheers, their voices echoing across comms. The impossible had happened. The Terran had defeated the very reflection built to destroy him. On the bridge of the Nemesis, the crew sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed the truth with their own eyes. Machines, codes, and councils could not replace what humans carried inside them. Instinct. Madness. The will to gamble everything on one impossible move. That was why Terran pilots had been feared. That was why they had been banned. The admiral, pale and trembling, finally lowered his head. He spoke words no one in the council had ever dared to speak before. Without humans, we are nothing. The Terran pilot said nothing. He simply leaned back in the chair, his eyes still on the fading fire outside. He knew the war was not over. More enemies would come, more shadows build from stolen human fire. But the galaxy had learned its lesson tonight. The Nemesis had outmaneuvered death itself. And from this day forward, no fleet would ever dare to fight without a Terran at the helm.